Good evening, friends. It's hard to believe what we are seeing and hearing, but this is today's Russia, where the line between the absurd and the tragic has long been erased. A war criminal publicly thanking for pastries, a room in a palace arranged to appear humble, and the performance broadcast as if it were an act of compassion. The illusion continues. A small chamber between the casino and the hookah lounge, a place where the nation's ruler sends greetings to his loyal followers, with a smile, with carefully rehearsed modesty, and with cameras rolling. The performance is flawless. The message, unmistakable. He's still in control, still the same people's man. But even through the velvet tone and decorative backdrops, the decay is visible. The empire built on showmanship begins to wobble. While greetings are exchanged in palaces, the economy falls apart beneath the glittering surface. The price of Russian oil has dropped below $35 a barrel, far from the $60 built into the national budget. China and India, once hailed as saviors of Russian exports, are now driving the hardest bargains, squeezing every possible discount out of a cornered dictator. Strategic partners, the officials say. In reality, silent executioners of Moscow's last remaining hope for profit. Yet on state television, anchors still smile, promising a bright new year. All is stable, they say, but behind the smile, panic grows, and on the front lines, chaos becomes routine. Soldiers crawl through mud, begging one another to hold on just a bit longer. A man with a shattered leg, carried, pushed, cheered on with desperate voices. "You can do it! Come on!" Those who claim to never abandon their own hide in the bushes, shouting encouragement instead of offering help. The Second Army of the World, they called it once. Now, a scattered shadow of itself, driven by fear and habit. Evacuation has become the new victory. Silence, the new anthem. Meanwhile, Moscow prepares to sanctify the next fallen hero. The ceremony will take place in the Cathedral of Christ the Savior, for a man known not as a martyr, but as a militant criminal, killed by police while selling weapons to anyone with cash. Yet in the modern mythology of state religion, he is already halfway to sainthood. The priest blesses the coffin, speaks of sacrifice and faith, while television commentators whisper the same familiar words. He gave his life for the motherland. The crowd nods, crosses themselves, and moves on. The fusion of faith and politics is now seamless. A sermon sounds like a military order, a tragedy like a patriotic act. Businessmen in cassocks call on others to die for the leader. They promise redemption, suggesting that it's better to perish in battle than to freeze drunk somewhere on the street. Their voices are calm, confident, trained to soothe. In this inverted world, destruction is wrapped in the language of salvation. They die as heroes, the priest says, as martyrs. And in the background, a new slogan emerges, not shouted, but whispered into every home. To die for the regime is to live forever. As we move forward, the stage widens. The provinces prepare for the holidays, the kind that mix mourning with celebration. In Arkhangelsk, a New Year's disco is organized right next to a public mourning ceremony. A perfect reflection of today's mood. Grief and entertainment, hand in hand. In Rostov, men dressed as soldiers are arrested, fake heroes mimicking the real ones, because in today's Russia, the difference hardly matters anymore. If a dictator's son can wear medals, why shouldn't anyone else? Factories that once filled the domestic market now export unsold cars to Iran and Yemen. Russian consumers can no longer afford them, and taxes continue to rise. Gas goes to China, oil to India, cars to the Middle East. And the Russian people are told to burn firewood and ride in carts. The show must go on, even when the stage is collapsing. Yet millions still watch, nodding, believing. Because belief, even in a lie, is easier than facing the truth. But the illusion begins to crack when those who believed the loudest start to suffer the most. Entrepreneurs who trusted the president's call to invest in the reborn city of Mariupol now record desperate video appeals. Their voices tremble as they beg for help. They speak of ruined buildings they rebuilt with their own hands, of millions invested, of documents never issued. They believed in promises of opportunity. Now their businesses are confiscated, their savings gone. Dear Vladimir Vladimirovich, they plead, please help us. Their loyalty remains untouched, even as their lives fall apart. Stay with us, because what you hear next will make even these voices of despair sound like whispers. The real picture behind these liberated lands, the truth about the so-called rebuilding, is darker than anyone dares to admit. Subscribe, stay tuned, because in the next part we'll reveal what the cameras never show. Part 2. The truth, once revealed, no longer allows silence. What is happening on those new territories is not reconstruction, but an erasure of life itself, wrapped in patriotic slogans. War correspondents who once glorified every advance now speak with quiet voices, their eyes giving away what words can't fully express. They describe kilometers of shattered villages, endless lines of chimney stacks where homes once stood, empty streets buried in ash and twisted iron. In the Krasnoarmysk direction, what used to be small, thriving settlements are now ghost lands. Nothing left but the memory of laughter, the smell of burned wood, the distant echo of what used to be normal life. It looks like a memorial, one of them admits, like Khatin in Belarus, a graveyard of villages. And he's right. What was once called liberation has turned into annihilation, systematic and final. Even the regime's loyal propagandists, such as Kamantian, cannot completely conceal what's unfolding. They show quick glimpses on television: a woman cooking in a basement, a child sleeping under a concrete beam, an old man whispering prayers in the dark. There are no undamaged buildings left, he confesses softly. Entire towns wiped out. But he immediately corrects himself. The footage is accompanied by optimistic music. The word reconstruction flashes on the screen, and the official commentary insists life is returning. It's a grotesque theater of survival. The reality is that life isn't returning. It's merely enduring, without hope, without light, without future. On the streets of Moscow and St. Petersburg, the illusion of peace continues. Coffee shops play jazz, influencers post pictures of snow-covered boulevards, and the city lights shimmer as if nothing beyond the capital exists. But even there, the cracks are visible. Prices rise faster than salaries, imported goods vanish from shelves, and people learn to whisper again, just like their grandparents did decades ago. The fear is back, polite and quiet, hiding behind lowered voices and knowing glances. State media keeps repeating, everything is under control. Yet the most dangerous sign for any authoritarian system is not rebellion, it's the absence of belief. And now, the faith in the system is slipping away, one disappointed citizen at a time. The economy, long hollowed out by corruption, now survives only on improvisation. Factories rebrand foreign goods as domestic. Officials report success that exists only on paper. The ruble staggers. The national reserves shrink under sanctions that the government once mocked. The oil profits that once fed the budget have turned into a trickle. India and China demand deeper discounts every month, exploiting Russia's desperation with silent precision. The Kremlin calls it strategic flexibility. Economists call it what it is: surrender through trade. And the people, told to be proud of self-sufficiency, now queue for imported medicines that no longer arrive. Meanwhile, propaganda shifts its focus from prosperity to endurance. The new national virtue is suffering. We can live without the West, the presenters repeat each evening, smiling through clenched teeth. We have our faith, our history, our greatness. But even those words sound hollow when spoken against the backdrop of ruined cities, empty classrooms, and hospitals running out of supplies. In Mariupol, Taganrog, Melitopol, and other occupied regions, the so-called rebuilding is carried out by loyal contractors who rush to show progress before the cameras arrive. Facades are painted, debris cleared from the streets, but only the upper layers, only what the drone can capture. Inside, behind those fresh painted walls, there are still no windows, no heating, no running water. It's all built for television, not for people. The business owners who once believed in the Kremlin's call to rebuild the Donbas are now caught in the machinery they helped sustain. The woman from Tula who invested 70 million rubles into restoring broken shops and cafes now finds herself without property, without rights, and without answers. Her story is not unique. Hundreds of small entrepreneurs across Russia stepped into the ruins, convinced that loyalty would protect them. Instead, their restored buildings were confiscated, their equipment seized under municipal necessity. The local administrations tell them to wait for documentation, but the documents never arrive. Their appeals go unanswered, except by propaganda outlets, which call their suffering temporary difficulties in the process of rebirth. When you listen to their voices, you hear not anger but confusion. They still begin their pleas with the same ritual phrase, "Dear Vladimir Vladimirovich." They still believe he will hear them, that the man who built the system can somehow save them from it. The tragedy lies not only in their loss, but in their faith, faith that refuses to break even after everything else has been taken. They thank him even as they beg for help. They praise him even as their livelihoods disappear. It's a portrait of dependence, painted over decades of manipulation, a generation taught that the state is both the abuser and the savior. While this faith persists, so does the cycle. Journalists trying to show the truth face arrests, fines, and forced exile. Independent voices are labeled as foreign agents, silenced by bureaucracy and fear. The information vacuum deepens. What remains is a constant loop of patriotic slogans, religious sermons, and staged triumphs. The state has mastered the art of emotional exhaustion. Wear the people down with contradictions until they stop asking questions. Every tragedy is presented as proof of strength, every loss as a form of glory. And yet, beneath all that, there's a quiet transformation. The same soldiers who once shouted, "For the motherland," now return home without legs, without arms, without illusions. They see the truth with their own eyes, that no one will rebuild what they destroyed. Their medals mean little when they face a future of neglect. Hospitals are overcrowded, benefits delayed, promises forgotten. Families are left to cope alone, while television still shows endless parades and speeches. The contrast grows sharper every day, between the image and the reality, between the leader's calm voice and the unbearable silence of those who believed him. At the same time, Russia's international isolation deepens. Once powerful in global politics, the country now looks eastward, not from strength, but from necessity. Its influence shrinks, its allies grow cautious. Even those who buy its oil and gas do so with indifference, not friendship. And in Europe, the resolve hardens. Ukraine, despite unimaginable suffering, continues to fight, rebuild, and hope. In Dnipro, the ruins left by a missile strike in 2023 have already been replaced by new walls, new windows, new life. The people there speak not of revenge, but of dignity. They rebuild not for power, but for survival, and that makes them stronger than any empire. Every destroyed city, every broken bridge, every stolen life becomes a symbol of what this war has truly achieved. The special operation that was meant to restore greatness has left behind only emptiness. But even in this emptiness, a new understanding begins to form. The truth cannot be erased forever. No matter how thick the propaganda, how loud the anthems, how polished the lies, reality has a way of returning. Slowly, quietly, relentlessly. Stay with us, because the story doesn't end here. In the next part, we'll look deeper, beyond the politics, beyond the ruins, into what this moment means for the future. What will happen when the illusion finally collapses? What remains of a nation that traded its conscience for control? Subscribe and listen closely, because what comes next will shape the fate of generations. Part 3. When the illusion finally shatters, what remains is not silence, it's the sound of awakening. Slowly, one by one, people begin to see through the fog that once covered everything. The television no longer convinces, the speeches no longer inspire. Families who once clapped for the leader now sit at dinner tables, whispering questions they were afraid to ask before. What was it all for? Where did the promises go? Why is there so much grief and so little hope? In small apartments across the country, these conversations become the quiet heartbeat of a nation rediscovering its voice. The collapse of illusion begins not in palaces or parliaments, but in the most ordinary places. In schools, in hospitals, in small shops where shelves stand half empty. Teachers are told to explain history without mentioning truth, yet their students find it online. Doctors struggle with shortages and broken equipment, yet they still save lives every day, refusing to give up. This silent resistance doesn't look heroic, but it's the beginning of change. It's not a revolution of slogans, but of awareness, the understanding that no one else will fix this country unless its people do. In the occupied territories, the contrast between propaganda and reality grows unbearable. The banners that proclaim "We are together" hang over streets lined with ruins. The promised reconstruction turns into a mirage. A few restored facades for cameras, while behind them, people still live without heat or water. Children attend makeshift schools in basements. Elderly residents wait for pensions that never come. Every promise made to them becomes another echo of betrayal. The very word liberation turns bitter in their mouths. They see who benefits and who pays the price, and that realization changes everything. The war has consumed not only lives but meaning itself. It has turned faith into performance, heroism into a tool of manipulation, patriotism into a weapon against one's own people. And yet, somewhere beyond the smoke and slogans, real courage begins to surface. Not the kind that marches under flags, but the kind that tells the truth when it's dangerous to speak. Journalists who fled the country continue to report, broadcasting from exile. Volunteers gather aid for refugees, often risking imprisonment. Anonymous citizens leak documents, expose corruption, share evidence of crimes. Their names may never be known, but their actions build the foundation for a future where truth is possible again. Inside Russia, the regime tightens control, but it cannot control everything. The internet becomes a battlefield of information. Despite censorship, millions use VPNs, encrypted chats, and foreign platforms to read, to watch, to understand. It's no longer possible to erase every video, to silence every voice. The younger generation, those who grew up after the fall of the Soviet Union, see through the state's nostalgia. They were raised on technology, not fear. For them, loyalty to power means little compared to loyalty to reality. They don't shout slogans, but they remember. And that memory, multiplied across millions of minds, is stronger than any official decree. The longer the war drags on, the more it exposes the emptiness of the ideology behind it. The talk of spiritual values rings hollow when churches bless weapons. The speeches about greatness lose weight when parents bury their sons in silence. In cities like Voronezh, Samara, and Chelyabinsk, new cemeteries grow faster than new factories. Each grave carries not just a name, but a question that no one in power dares to answer. And those questions, whispered in grief, travel faster than any propaganda broadcast. They reach the hearts of millions who once believed and now quietly doubt. At the same time, outside Russia's borders, the world moves on. Ukraine continues to rebuild, slow, painful, determined. Streets once filled with rubble now show signs of renewal. Children return to schools rebuilt with international aid. Businesses reopen in cities once under attack. In Kiev, Kharkiv, and Odessa, people speak of the future not as a dream, but as a plan. Every window replaced, every light turned back on, becomes a small act of defiance against destruction. Their resilience sends a message louder than any weapon, that freedom, once defended, cannot be bombed out of existence. And as Ukraine heals, the rest of the world begins to understand that this war was never just about territory. It was about truth itself, about the right to choose light over darkness, dignity over obedience. The nations that once hesitated now unite more firmly, strengthening their support, aware that compromise with lies only feeds their return. The divide between those who build and those who destroy becomes clearer than ever. And on one side of that divide stands a people rebuilding their country from ashes. On the other stands a regime still trying to convince its own citizens that ruin is victory. Inside Russia, a new generation begins to look westward not for material things, but for values, for openness, honesty, accountability. They want a country where speaking freely is not an act of rebellion, where the truth is not punished, where love for one's homeland doesn't mean hatred for others. It will take time, maybe decades, but history shows that even the most rigid systems eventually collapse under the weight of their own falsehoods. The monuments of today's power will one day stand as relics of denial, reminders of what happens when fear is mistaken for loyalty. The most powerful transformation, however, happens quietly. It's in the way people talk to each other again, cautiously at first, then more openly. It's in the way independent voices return from exile, in the way communities rediscover trust. The propaganda machine still runs, but its words no longer land the same way. Every lie, once swallowed whole, now leaves a bitter taste. The country is waking up, slowly, painfully, but irreversibly. Even those who once supported the war begin to question, because truth, once seen, cannot be unseen. And one day, not marked by parades or speeches, the fear will simply end. Not because someone orders it, but because people stop believing that they have to live this way. The change won't come from above. It will rise from below, from those who repair, who teach, who remember, who refuse to forget. It will come from the mothers who ask why their sons never came home, from the teachers who still tell their students to think critically, from the small acts of decency that survive every system. These are the beginnings of something larger than politics, the return of humanity. When the dust settles, history will not remember the slogans or the televised promises. It will remember those who told the truth when it was dangerous to speak. It will remember the faces of people who refused to hate. It will remember Ukraine rising from ruins and Russia slowly, painfully, finding its way back to conscience. That will be the true ending of this story. Not triumph, not revenge, but understanding. A recognition that power built on lies cannot last forever, and that even after years of darkness, dawn always comes. So stay with us, because this story is far from over. What's unfolding now is more than politics. It's the rebirth of awareness, the long return of reason after years of deception. Subscribe, listen, and remember. Every truth, once spoken, becomes impossible to silence. The world is watching, history is recording, and the future is already beginning. Not in palaces, not in armies, but in the hearts of those who still dare to hope.